Well, hi there. I'm Sandy Allnock, and I am here with your monthly segment of Create in Color, where I do some kind of coloring with some sort of medium and MFT stamps each month. This time I'm going to use Up in the Air. It has great little animals you can put in the big balloon, a bunch of little balloons, little house scenes, lots of options for different kinds of things you can do with this stamp set. So I'm going to start by putting it in my MISTI and stamping my animal that's going to go into my balloon first, since when you're masking you need to stamp from the front to the back, and trim him out. And I have the houses stamped down below because they're going to be in part of the scene that I'm going to create. So now I've stamped my balloon with the little critter masked out. It's going to be my dog. And then I'm going to add on some other balloons. So I've masked out the top of the balloon portion. Notice I didn't have to trim out the rest of the balloon. If you're going to only use part of it as a mask, then don't bother wasting your time for the rest of it. It's a lot of extra things to worry about. So here is my scene that I'm going to start to color. I wanted to put my ground in first to sort of figure out what this is going to look like. I knew I wanted some hillsides down here at the bottom. And so I'm taking one of my green pencils and just kind of putting some color out there, leaving a path of white for the moment, because I wanted to add I was debating whether it was going to be a road, so it would have hard edges, or more of a country path. And that is how it ended up later. So you'll see how that works out. I'm using my Museum Aquarelle pencils from Caran d'Ache. And these are expensive pencils, just so you know. They're one of my favorite brands. And even if you just get a couple of your favorite colors, sometimes it's worth it because they are really rich in color and they melt out beautifully as watercolor. And there's just something special about them. So I love coloring with them. Gonna color up the puppy here and give it the markings of my dog, because my Vanna would probably be the one who would hop right into a balloon and fly away, because she's a little independent soul, that girl of mine. If you've seen her on my Instagram, or her Instagram, you can see them at Giallo and Vienna. Those two are little crazy pups. And she's my rebel. She's the one who doesn't like to listen, so she would be riding off in a balloon without me. So that's why I decided to put her in there. I'm throwing some random colors into the balloon so I could just have some really bright, cheery fun going on up there. Have to get my yellow in there, and then lots of other colors. I'm trying to rotate a little bit, kind of cool, warm on the stripes around each of my balloons. Was relatively successful in that mental plan. It started out, shall we say, as a plan, and may or may not have actually panned out. You never know, right? So get all my colors finished in here. I'm going to add some yellow down here in the path. That's where I decided I was going to make it a really soft countryside path. And then I'm going to take my brush. This is a number 12 brush. I've been challenging myself to use a big brush in whatever I do, trying to get myself looser. But I wanted to show you with this number 12 brush, you can actually get some fine detail. This silver brush makes a brush that really points beautifully. So even in these tiny areas, I'm going to try to get this whole thing done with a number 12 brush. If you're looking for a size for most people, then I would say probably if you're going to go for one brush, I would probably do an 8, because you can do a little bit of background work with them. You can't do giant washes necessarily, but you know, an 8 and a 12 are the two that I use the most. And here I just wanted to see if I could do this all with a 12. I'm adding just a bunch of water here on the ground and letting the green and the brown or the yellowish color blend together and make this really soft curved path in between these trees, or in between the trees and the houses, all the way out to the back, and making my little hillsides. And I started noticing there was more blending going on than I wanted. So I will show you a little trick for how to do that, to fix that. I've taken my brush, I've rinsed it, and then it's pretty dry. I wiped it off on my fingers, and then I'm just wiping off the path and just removing some of that color so that I end up with a slightly lighter path going through it. I am going to add some detail to that later, but that at least gives me a framework for having a lighter path for the road than I do for the grasses around it. Now I'm just going to finish off watercoloring all the rest of it. A watercolor pencil, for the most part, if you haven't tried it yet, is a more controlled way of doing watercolor. A lot of people don't even try watercolor because it just seems like it's too foreign. They're used to a pen or a pencil. And with watercolor pencil, you get kind of both sides. You get to very controlledly choose your color. You don't have to think about, oh my gosh, if I get it wet right now, am I going to wreck anything? You can just sit and get all your pencil work done and then start in with your brush work. You notice that I'm bouncing around from one area to another and one section, then work on another section. I'm trying not to work on two areas that are too close to each other too quickly, because if you start working on one area while another area is wet, you could have some bleeding going on between them. So I'm just bouncing around for the most part around different areas, and you can heat set in between, but I find that heat setting just curls my paper, so I prefer to just let it air dry if I can possibly do that. And sometimes I rinse my brush in between, sometimes I don't. In between that red and the yellow, I knew I could use that red if there was some still left on the tip of my brush. I could have used it as a shadow in the yellow, or it turned the yellow a little bit orange, wouldn't bother me. But for the most part, if you're going to switch from one color to another, remember you're going to have some pigment on that brush. And so if you end up carrying it along with you, you could mix some colors that you didn't really plan on mixing. Look at all that fine detail I can still get with that big fat brush, that big fat 12. I heard from someone on YouTube, and I think it was Kelly Ennington. I keep trying to remember, and I should probably go back and look. And I heard from her that you should use the largest brush you can possibly get away with in whatever you're painting, because otherwise you start getting too controlled and too fussy and too detailed, where when you're doing anything with watercolor and anything with a brush, just let it be looser. And even though this is still tight coloring, it's still very controlled. If I were to use a teeny tiny brush, it would take me longer, for one, but it also, I would get lost in tiny strokes. And sometimes when you have a big brush, you can make a larger swipe of color rather than trying to do it all with teeny tiny strokes. Well, now I've got a black Sharpie pen that I'm just going to add some detail. I'm going to go around my path and just add a sketchy kind of a line, and make that path go along where I had already painted it. Add a few more details to the scene so that my houses have somewhere to sit. And there you go. All finished and beautiful, bright and happy color. You lift me up. That sentiment, by the way, I cut in half so I could put the other half of the sentiment inside. Don't stress about cutting your stamps in half. Sometimes it's okay to do that. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, click that like button. Make sure you go over to the blog, which will be linked, I believe, down in the doobly-doo, so that you can pin these pictures and remind yourself of how you might want to color something later on. And I will see you guys next month. I hope you have a really great time. Until then, go color something beautiful. Thanks. Bye-bye.